Today we're going to get into some lies that you've been chewing on for quite a while. There's a bunch of them. One of the subjects we're going to cover is the Roman Empire versus Imperial Rome. And we're going to lend some attention to this term imperial. Excuse me. Another thing we're going to uncover, we're going to help to combat the lies that you've been taught since you were a child. Your grandparents were taught, your parents were taught. And that's why you've got the world the way that it is. When you lie to a planet for so long, you end up with some really confused, idiotic people, and that's what you've got right now. And a lot of people's trying to figure out how to deal with the world the way that it is when it was never intended to be that way. The truth was taken away from your grandparents and your parents and before that. And that's why you've got a world that's totally lost. You see, when you go against the natural order of the way God intended things to be, you have problems. And that's what you have in the world now. And it's going to get worse. Yes, the Bible is going to continue to be fulfilled. They say that over 90% of the prophecy in the Bible has already been fulfilled. So we still got about 10% to go. And that's scary. One of the lies you've been told, and you're constantly being told through your movies, through your joint effort of this Roman Empire, is that the earth is millions of years old. If you go ask people, if you go yourself, or you go to your workplace or your church or wherever you go, and you ask them about how old is the earth, and they'll give you figures into the millions or possibly the trillions or billions. That's a lie. That was a cold-blooded lie given to you by the Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Federal Empire. And note the word federal, because that's the key to this whole game, federal. I gave the world too much credit. I give them too much credit for being smarter than they really are, because I've noticed I've got a chance to go back over the videos that I've done, and I've got to see the comments. And I'm finding out two things. The world is still ignorant. Even the people that have watched and dabbled with these videos, they're still ignorant, and they're afraid. And they don't recognize either one of these attributes. People that are afraid, the first thing they do is deny they're afraid. They try to bury the fact that they're afraid. So when that fear comes up in them, that's the natural warning signal that God gave us. And the first thing people try to do is squash their fear. They've even got slogans now plastered on the back window of their cars and their trucks. No fear. And fear is the one thing that's helped us to survive. And if you can call it survival. But anyway, the earth is approximately 10,000 years old. And that's about as close as you're going to narrow it down. Biblically, you've got an Old Testament that gives us a timeline of about 6,000 years. You've got 400 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you've got just over 2,000 years from the starting of the New Testament on to today. So give or take some time for creation, whatever, you've got about 10,000 years that this earth has even been here. Also, I want to get into this Al Smith dinner. And this pretty much says it all. This here is a display of why your world that you live in is a conglomeration of stupidity and ignorance. Because this is the type of thing that you're given. Now, this is a Jesuit dinner, a Roman Catholic Jesuit dinner, and you can see that this fat bastard right here in the middle is a war cardinal of New York City. He's the head dude of the United States. And to his right, so humbly and submissive, sits that whore Hillary Clinton. And to his left is, who knows what he's about, Donald Trump. which I lean toward Donald Trump. You know, if you got a choice, that's what we're given now. We're given a choice between an idiot and a bigger idiot. So, but right in the middle, the display that you're getting is very accurate if you really look at it the way it is. This is their boss. And that's what the world's not getting. This ain't an Al Smith dinner. It's called the Al Smith dinner to play down the fact that the Jesuits are in control of this country. And they always have been. Now, another thing I want to hit on here is that any authority in the United States, whether it be from a judge, any kind of authority whatsoever, whether it be to carry out the death penalty, to execute a prisoner, to arrest anybody, to confiscate property, repossess your house, any authority in the United States, or any other country for that matter, comes from Rome. So how can that be? Does Rome come down here and supervise repossessing my house? No. The authority is already handed down to, segregated to different people. No one in the United States has any authority whatsoever unless it is given to them by Rome. And Rome has been very clever over the years. They did not really flaunt themselves years ago the way they do now. But this dinner here, there's a lot to be understood about our world if you really take into consideration how this dinner is. The arrogance, the absolute mind-numbing power that is displayed in this dinner. When you think of all of the calamities and problems in this country and how the attitudes of those that are in control have, what does it do? What does this attitude that's displayed through this enormous power here on this earth, what does it make the average person feel like, really feel like? Okay, well, it's not good. Another thing that I want to hit on, if I get time, is that I want you to understand this very clearly. Any book has been tainted, has been flawed, has been messed with by this Roman Empire. In other words, if you've been given the authority to write a book and that's been given the okay to publish, Rome is involved in it. Take the movie Gone with the Wind. I can't remember her name that they supposedly tell you. They lie to you and tell you that this woman wrote this book. Now there's a chance perhaps that this woman might have started a book at one time. Or she might have even completed a book. But it was taken over by Rome. And you'll find out that the very individual that supposedly got involved with this book was a Jesuit. So any information that you get, I'm telling you that this woman, if she was really schooled on the South to write Gone with the Wind, she would not have made the key family in this movie, the O'Haras, Catholic, because real historians, more creditable historians, have done research into the civil issues, civil wars, that type of thing, the life of the Confederacy, and they found that there wasn't a trace of Catholicism in the South, which makes sense in accordance with the things that I've taught you, that the southern states was basically started by Caucasians that came over to this continent in the 1500s and settled farther to the south because it was warmer. And that the Negro was sold to these successful Confederate residents by the Jesuits. Now, this isn't being taught in school. Most of the stuff that I'm giving you isn't being touched in school. And I'm seeing people in my everyday life that find me very offensive. They don't like what I do. They don't like the things I say, and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons they don't like what I say is because it makes them feel stupid. I talked to one guy the other day, and he says, I'm not sure that I want to know that. That's pathetic. To say, I'm not sure that I really want to know the truth. How hard is it for somebody to have to admit that they've lived their entire life void of the truth, void of real truth? We live in a world that has developed a cuisine or a taste for fantasy. And we live in a world where people feel that they can create their own reality. And that's what you're dealing with. If you try to tell them what really happened, they reject that. They're not, it's like almost like they are addicted to a particular drug, and you're trying to give them something they don't want. They've never tried. The truth is truly alien to these people. It's a sad situation. And if you want to lay the blame on somebody, you can lay it on this Roman Empire. Now, you have very little to go with when you try to study this corrupt institution. If you go to Google, if you go to the library. I started studying this institution at a very young age, and I'm going to give you a little rundown about how I got into this. I think that I was 11 years old. I could have been 10, 11, or the oldest I could have been was 12, because I can pinpoint where we lived at that time. I went to about 30 different grade schools. My parents moved around a lot. And I know by memory what house that I was in when I was first introduced to this. So I can give you an idea about where I was. So in my mind, I know I was somewhere around 11 years old. And I'll tell you how I got into this. My mom came to me one day, it was early in the day, and she said, she handed me a book. And the book was called Fox's Book of Martyrs. It was an old English version of Fox's Book of Martyrs. And I looked at her and I said, well, what do you want me to do with this? And she said, I want you to read it. And she said, just read it. And she says, and I'll check back with you on this, and I want to see what you think of this. Well, I understand that I didn't know anything about a martyr. I didn't know anything about this. So when I could, I would start to read some of this book. And after 3 weeks, month, she approached me again and she says, well, what do you think of that book? And I want you to pay close attention to what happened here. I said, Mom, it's really got me kind of puzzled. In so many words, I can't remember exactly what I said. But I said, it's hard to believe. And I'm saying this for a very important reason, and I want you to get this. She says, what do you mean? What do you mean it's hard to believe? I said, well, what I'm getting here is one religious institution is burning alive members of another religious institution. And I said, that in itself doesn't make any sense, because when the average person figures out that this Catholic Church is burning these people alive, they're going to think bad about the Catholic Church. It's not going to help them. It's not going to help them in their image, and it's not going to help them with their reputation. It's not going to help them at all. And I said, I just can't understand why they would burn these people alive. It doesn't give me a reason outside of the fact that their approach to Jesus Christ is different than their approach. And this gives them the right to burn people alive. Do you understand how big this is? The reason why people don't want to face this issue, your churches don't want to face it anymore, preachers don't talk about it anymore, because it's an embarrassment to them. All right, so I told my mom, I said, it's hard to believe it. It's hard for me to get inspired, more or less, with this issue, with this book, because I don't know whether I'm reading fantasy or fiction. And when I got older, I realized that more people are going to be faced with this issue. So I'm going to tell you in the plainest language that I can why these people were murdered the way they were. I don't know exactly the number, how many were burned, how many were beheaded, how many were tortured, the extent of their pain and their anguish. I can't know that right now. But I know that whatever age I was, whether it was 10, 11, or 12, I know that this made such an impact on me. So her answer to me was, she says, well, that's what you need to find out. I asked her that basically what was in my mind after reading what I read. I said, I just don't understand even why, if it was true, why they would do this to these people. Why? What's the real reason? This is big. Nobody's going to do this unless there is a major, big reason. I mean, big. And she said, well, that's what you need to find out. So from that time on, this was a big part of my life. It just stuck with me. I could remember going to sleep at night and I could just envision and imagine being burned alive. And what made it so horrible for me was that these people were so good. They just believed in this Jesus. They believed this was their choice of hope. These people. These people that were deprived the most basic human rights. And here, this institution is with us today, presiding over our elected officials. How can this be? How can I live in a world that's stupid? This man represents murder. This man represents pedophilia. This man represents total dominant power over other human beings in such an arrogant way. And here we find ourselves submitting to this man, honoring this man, this monster who represents thousands of years of blood, guts, torture, murder, child molestations. And I'm supposed to respect these politicians that are sitting there so carefully, not wanting to offend this fat bastard. And all these other jerks that are sitting there selling their souls for just a few years of security when they're all going to die. They're going to die. Every one of these idiots are going to die. They're selling their soul, their character, their conscience, and everything to this institution, as if they're going to get eternal life from it. The only thing they're going to get is death and the promise of hell. That's it. So I've made up my mind that they can have their promise of hell and they can have their few minutes of fame as they rot in their own bodies. And I'm going to stand on the Lord. I'm going to stand with the Lord. I'm going to stand with His truth. And I'm going to stand with those people that died that everybody else has forgotten. And This is a heavy thing to carry around, especially for a kid. So many times I just wished I never knew it. I wished I never read that book. It's hard to get an old copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs now. They had little pictures that they drew in this book. Just little black and white drawings by some, I guess they called him an artist back then. They could draw, but it wasn't that creative. It wasn't that, but the book stayed with me my entire life. I'm not worthy to talk about these martyrs. Somebody asked me, they said, well, what would you do if they threatened to burn you alive? Would you lay your Bible down? Would you denounce? Would you denounce your faith in God? If they threatened you with torture, how long would they torture you before you'd finally give in? I don't know. I don't know how long I would hold out. But I know this, the same institution, if they could burn such good people alive, burn them. And then I thought, I had a lot of time to think about this, because as I grew older, I just examined practically every aspect of this horrible incident, played over and over again in my mind. What about these people that stood by? They let them burn. The same people then are here today. And then I would look at people around me and I thought, well, if I was to be burned alive, what would these people do? Would they stand there? Would they stand there and watch me die? So I had a hard time making friends growing up. Because everybody I looked at, I saw them standing there watching me burn. I couldn't feel good about anybody, practically. It's hard for me to trust anybody. So we're going to close this out. Before I go, I want to tell you that you are a part of a hypocritical, ugly mess that was created by this Roman Empire. They took over your country a long time ago. All right. First of all, you think people established government. People never established government. People had colonies. Even some of your movies gives you a little bit of truth. That low-life Mel Gibson, he used to make a statement in front of his movie Braveheart. He used to say history was written, come out of his own mouth. I don't know if they even allow that to be said anymore. He said history was written by the men or those that murdered the good people. The people that won the war is the one that wrote the history. So your history is being written by murder and thieves, okay? And if you don't think your little gospel while you sit in that little phony church you're sitting into, baptizing totally different than the Bible tells you to. There was not one documented baptism for salvation in the Bible, in the 1611 King James Bible, which is the only Bible. And these people growing up today, their brains have been totally mushed by all these lies. There has always been one Bible. The 1611 King James Bible. Up until the 1611 King James Bible, there were Bibles, but they wasn't accessible to anybody. They had one Bible called the Great Bible. It was an English translation of the Bible. It was chained to a pole, and people had to come from miles to even just to see it or read out of it. When the 1611 King James Bible came along, it was the first Bible that was accessible to the world. The whole world got to have the Bible, the poor people, the rich people. It was accessible. And this is what King James of England wanted, I believe he was a good man. I've done research on him, but you have to trust your gut. You have to trust the Word of God. Between the Word of God and your spirit that you feel for the Lord, your gut is how you make your determinations, because everything else is tainted. Everything else is messed up. And this, biblically, he's an idiot. Biblically, he's an antichrist. And I also found out that Trump did not want to get involved in the molestation charges, the charges of child molestation. He didn't want to get involved with that. And he can't. I'm surprised he's still alive. If the man's trying to do any good at all, I don't think that you're seeing all these Democrats and all these news media just thrashing Trump 24 hours a day. That's not normal. That's not natural. These people aren't doing that because they want to. These people are told to do this. This man's institution controls all media. I can't take you back in time with me and put you there with the people that I've talked to. The people that I've actually stood face to face with. Retired federal employees, retired federal people. There's two that stands out. I want to give you them. This one little old man was up in years, and he just impressed me as the type of person that didn't even have time to lie. And he was reluctant to tell me, but he said he worked on a particular situation years ago. He worked for the government. And he said, almost painfully, he said, well, we found out that AT&T was owned by the government. And this is back in the 50s. Well, to him, it's owned by the government. See, your federal and your Catholic is the same. It's just two different divisions. Your federal government wouldn't have any power. People want to think of the federal government separate from the Catholic Church. All authority came from the Catholic Church. All authority came from this so-called Pope. It was given to him to administer authority to different divisions. But he said that AT&T was owned by the federal government. It was owned by the government. He didn't even use the word federal, owned by the government. And when people talk about the government, they don't even, a lot of them don't even consciously distinguish federal government, which is this worldwide thing like the Catholic Church is, and local state government. You wasn't with me when the man told me that the federal government, or the Catholic Church, literally said the Catholic Church owned all diamond mines. So I can't walk you back through time with me and give you all of the inspirational events that happened in my life from people that I got to look in their eyes and I could feel that they were telling me the truth. This is an effort to give you the truth.